Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Paranormal romance suspense pioneer Heather Graham has been entertaining readers for generations with a staggering 150 books in print, 25 countries, with over 70 million books sold around the world. Author of the wildly popular Crew of Hunters series and the best-selling Vampire series among countless others, Harrison Investigation series, and then the Flynn brothers or Cafferty and Quinn or the Graham family, or all sorts of other standalones like Hurricane Bay, Picture Me Dead, I could go on and on. We're lucky to be joined by Heather. Welcome to the show.
Hey,
Your books have been casting spells on readers for decades in all sorts of different worlds that you create on the page. Where does it usually begin for you? With a story idea or with a character?
I definitely think so, but it has for me, it has everything to do with people and places. I'm a
Okay.
huge fan of interesting places, and I mean every place you go will have something interesting about it. But I noticed that you did look at a lot of things, and Salem, Massachusetts is one of my favorite places. And again, there's the people connection because, okay, my mom was born in Ireland, dad's family came from Scotland. And so they also had a huge influence on uh, everything that I've done because the Irish are the most amazing storytellers. They will come up with so much. And they were also readers. But I had one sister, and my parents moved to Florida. The rest of the family, when they immigrated, my mom and dad met working for Con Edison in Chicago, though he had grown up in northern Wisconsin. His dad was a manager of a log mining camp. But he was quite a bit older when I was born. After, they kind of met after World War II, after years had gone by. Um, but I didn't get to spend as much time with his family as I did with my mother's. Though they were all great at telling you things that were, absolutely ridiculous and impossible, but lots of fun. I think one of my favorite with my great grandmother was she used to tell my sister and I when she was watching us, if you not be behaving, the banshees be getting you in the outhouse, you know. you know, so she had us convinced of all kinds of things. And I think we were teenagers when we were like, wow, she scared us with that. And we didn't even have an outhouse. How did she do that? Um, but they were fun too. They had all kinds of great things. And I think the other thing that my family really did for me is both my mom and dad were huge readers. So from the time I was a little kid, I was just immersed in stories. And they would go to the library with you. We spent time in bookstores, and between them, it was very varied reading, nonfiction, fiction. So they, definitely had that massive influence.
How do you feel your background studying acting from such a young age helped develop your writing mind? So to speak, from looking at character points of view to all sorts of things with story structure, dialogue, it had to cover a lot of relevant territory.
I think that I absolutely loved what I did. And to this day, um, my kids like to joke that I became a writer so that I could write the shows and cast them and always make sure I had a role. so, because we still do. We have something called Slush Pile Productions. And our last production was a dinner theater at VoucherCon. And we have done them every year, little skits. They're like 20 or 30 minutes. Um, but we do them for different conventions and conferences, and then have giveaways for whoever guesses who did it and things like that. But I love the theater to this day. I love the theater. I will go to any play at the drop of a hat. I so encourage young people. I have a daughter, my youngest daughter also went on to Cal Arts and has been pursuing out in California. A little bit difficult at the moment, but she's still working. But when I was at South Florida, it was kind of great because I don't think the school was not very old at the time, and we didn't have sports teams yet, and so all the money went into the arts department. And I was able to, on a European study, I got to the Abbey in Dublin, I got to Marcel Marceau School in France, and just was able to do some fantastic things. Worked with the Gallaudet Theater for the Deaf, and just wonderful, wonderful things. And I worked in dinner theater when I got out of school. But dinner theater in Florida was not very well paying at the time. So I would be doing dinner theater, and then I would be bartending I worked for entertainers down here, the Rhodes Brothers, and they were actually great people. I loved them to death. They were kind, they were good, but it just wasn't, I could get $10 for doing backup music for a couple of hours. And between it all, I just was not kind of making it. Nobody found me in an ice cream parlor. So at one point, once we had 3 children, it just wasn't paying. And that was when I stayed home and started writing. Obviously, working with people is great. Something, that we miss terribly now. But I do think I remember so many of the really wonderful people that I worked with. And also a lot of strange things within, that, which of course I'm sure you know a lot about. I'll never forget one of them. I was hired for a Trim Twist commercial, and their motto was "Everybody's doing it." Well, my dog was also hired, and the dog had a bigger paycheck than I did. So I'm not sure if that was like, maybe you should be looking at other directions. But working with people, even on directing, on listening to what their vision of something is, I think has a lot to do with getting your mind to work in a certain direction. And then again, there's nothing like performing live on stage. I mean, to me, um, I just love the interaction with people, and we have had so much fun because I bring up, obviously these things I bring up a lot of my friends, and brought Charlene Harris up on the last one and had a great time with her, David Morrell, F. Paul Wilson. A lot of those, they're just so much fun to see how much they get into it too, because it is fun to see. Even the last thing that I was, I'm so sorry, last thing that we did that I was talking about at the VoucherCon, a couple of the players came in with things I hadn't even imagined. And, they brought a whole nother dimension to what we were doing. So I think working with people is always fun, which is moving into writing. Whenever you go anywhere, I have yet to be in a city, I think anywhere in the country or the world, where I have not gone on a ghost tour. So you gain so much, even when you disagree, even when you think something's silly. There's all kinds of things, because I was gonna say, I've been on some various places. I love St. Augustine, Florida. I was on a tour that was actually with a history group out of Castillo San Marcos, and the tour guide announced to the group the story about Osceola's head, that his doctor had put it on the bedpost after he'd been executed. And I was like, he was not executed. He had died of natural causes. And I figured I wasn't going to ruin her tour and say anything, but I was so surprised that somebody would come up with something like that. So, but I mean, even when you feel something different, know something different, there's always something that you gain.
Along with theater and writing at home, I bet all the road trips you took with a young family with 3 children provided all kinds of material for story ideas, with everything you saw along the way, the places you visited, the people you met.
I got married very young at 18, right out of school. My husband had gone to junior high and waited for me. He's a couple years older, so that we could go off to University of South Florida together. But his family was kind of the opposite. He's an only child and has, I think, probably now with the generations, 200 or 300 living cousins. So they were just a huge family. And when people say, oh, you're not marrying the family, I would marry for this family. They're just incredible. They're wonderful. And they had both, all 4 of his grandparents, when they had come over, they'd all settled in Massachusetts. So we would go up and down the East Coast continually with 5 kids eventually to visit this wonderful family in Massachusetts, and spend then a great deal of time up in Salem. And I became absolutely fascinated with the history there, not just the witchcraft, but everything that went on, going into the next generations with, it's amazing to think that Benjamin Franklin was born as a Puritan. And I think one of the things you learn up there is why our founding fathers were so determined that we would have freedom of religion, because the Puritans who'd come over for freedom of religion wound up hanging Quakers. So we don't want to repeat the same mistakes that we've made. I think the one thing, I mean, I'm sure it's possible, and I'm sure statistically there are a few people, but of all the writers I know who have um, made a career out of writing, they all loved books. You start out by loving to read. And there's that old adage about you must write what you know, but I also think you have to write what you love, because your passion, your commitment, your feeling about your subject matter is going to come through in what they term your voice. So I do think it's important. The other thing is with following trends, again, statistically, I'm sure you could make out, but you never know, because what's the big hot popular thing this year, by next year could be old hat. You just don't know. So write what you love is something I believe in.
Wonderful advice, thank you. Do you recommend that aspiring authors travel as much as possible to broaden the boundaries of their source material and by extension their imagination?
I think it depends on the person. And then again, because it just happened to be the way my life went with us traveling frequently, it works for me. I love places. I love touching them. I love, I mean, there's the joke about the way, yes, and you love the way New Orleans smells at 6 a.m. Actually, 6 a.m. is not bad. That's when the street cleaners come out, but um, I do enjoy it very much. But I do have friends who don't travel and they do a beautiful job with things. So I think that's, to me, the most important piece of writing advice is to listen to everything, go to conferences when you can, because they're great. The people you meet, the things they give you, the connections they have, that's all great. And you can listen to people and you can get all kinds of advice, but nobody writes the same. And what works for one person may not work for you.
Please take viewers back to some of the books you were reading at home during those years when you were first writing that might have been an influence as you were putting together what became your first book.
I don't know now, because with everything going on, I've been living with my daughter and a 2-year-old, and the 2-year-old is more distracting than all 5 of mine were when I was younger. So I'm not really sure how I did that, but I knew that kind of was the plan when I had decided I would stay home. Was that my husband was great, and of course this dates me, but I think more than really thinking anything would happen, he was thinking, oh, thank God she's made this decision to stay home. And he came home with a Selectric typewriter, and I'll never forget, it was missing the E. And every night I'd go and fill in all the E's. I can't begin to tell you how many E's there are in a page, but I knew that I wanted to try it. I had written a paper that I actually got one of my scholarships to college through the paper, and that I'd written. And so I mean, I knew it was something I wanted to do. And mine wasn't so much that I read things that I thought I could do better. Mine was that I thought, this is wonderful, I want to do it. And I have to admit, at the time, I was reading a lot of Navy books. My dad had been U.S. Navy, and had a lot. I'm a diver, so I had a lot on diving and treasure and all that kind of thing. But I also had a lot of Gothic books, the Mary Stuart, Dorothy Eden. I'm forgetting some people I loved, but the thing we were talking about with atmosphere is I would read those and I would want to go riding across the moors. I could see it. It was so visual. And I think that that was something that I wanted to give back. Obviously, growing up in South Florida, I didn't have moors to go riding across. But again, there's just so much marvelous and unique about anywhere you go that I think is so much fun to share with people, and to try to let them see the wonder of it kind of the same way.
Holding your first published book in your hand is a once in a lifetime moment for any author. You've now done it 150 times over. When you travel back to that first one, it must still put a smile on your face.
Thrilled. Yeah, I was so excited, of course. Yeah. It's kind of like I can't believe this really happened, because sometimes, again, my major was theater. It was not English or journalism. And I know that every once in a while I think of myself as a sham. So more of a storyteller, and just amazed and grateful uh, that I have been able to do this and that people have allowed me to do this. So I'm very, very grateful.
Again, going back to your rich acting background, that had to help so much when you were playing out all the different scenarios, writing your first string of best-selling romances, whether Tender Taming or Night Moves, Game of Love, Snowfire, Red Midnight, Liar's Moon, The Devil's Mistress, Night Heat. There's so many I bet it helped with.
I think, I mean, obviously, we all know that you have to have conflict because, you've got to have a conflict so that they get together. Conflict usually means, it's kind of the same thing when you go on stage. It's not always who am I, but it's what do I want? What am I trying to get? What am I trying to achieve? And so if you have somebody who's deeply involved with someone and then someone else who's investigating them, you're going to have a little bit of schism going right there because that this person, is absolutely solid. And how dare you come in, and behave that way? So I think that's one thing. And then I think also, I'll be honest, I don't remember everything I wrote all the time. And I really did write it. But like I say, on a desert island, somebody who actually knows what they're doing and someone who doesn't, and thinks that they're going to manage it anyway. They're just, I think all we have to do is think about our own personalities, what makes us different. Think about people that you love. What is it you love about them? And not even, romantically. I mean, just people in your life who you love and admire, and they're wonderful. And I think I think that's what helps us create any character. And then also remembering that when you're doing that, you've got to give them something that's a state of conflict. So for them to be able to, if you are putting the romantic element in it, yeah, you've got to have that conflict between them.
You have one of the most eclectic catalogs out there in terms of range of genres you can write prolifically in, and historical fiction's no exception. Whether we're talking about the Cameron saga, or the American Woman trilogy, or Civil War trilogy, or the old Florida Mackenzie saga, I'm curious what's always fascinated you so much about history to make you want to travel back to so many different eras on the page.
When I had started writing, first thing I sold was to the Miami News a short horror story for $15. That was not going to buy the groceries, but anyway, I had also um, been seeing different series of books that were coming more into the present. Because at one time I'd said, no, I will never write a series book because it seems to me that they're all about women who go to be governesses for a rich French dude um, who owns a vineyard. And he was usually a little bit older, so I started writing so young. I didn't know what she'd want with somebody that decrepit anyway. That was hard. And then it kind of bothered me that don't you want something yourself? Isn't there something that you want to move on with yourself instead of just, helping manage his vineyard? But right around that time, they started turning around. It was more active. So that I had started writing a book to send off to was Dell at the time, which is now part of Bertelsmann. But they had put out a series, and it was kind of like coming up into the present day. So I had sent to them, but at the same time, when my mom had come over, she brought this amazing library of books about Dublin. So I had always wanted to write a book on the Viking founding of Dublin. And the one company didn't want to see it because they were focusing on their contemporary series. And actually, Catherine Falk, who owned Romantic Times, came down and she had one of her new magazines with her. I think she'd been out a few years. But there was an advertisement that an editor named Liza Dawson at Pinnacle was looking for someone who could write historicals with a voice like Heather Graham. And I thought, I can do that. I can do that. So I submitted, and that was where the history first came in, and also where Shannon Drake came in because they were proprietarial at the time. And also, I think it's a good, that would be my suggestions to people, that I didn't do well myself, is when you are writing different things, even if you want it to be the same name, make it the same name a little bit different, so that people know what they're buying. Because I always hate for somebody to don't buy a ghost book if you don't like a ghost book. You know what I mean? You want to make sure that people are happy with what they've gotten. So you always want them to know from the cover, from the back copy, and also because they do reprint things, I'm always trying to make sure I get letters in it or something, because I don't want you to buy it again if you already bought it, unless you want to, then it's great. But otherwise, you don't want to do that kind of thing. And that's why a pseudonym can be important. So at the time, Shannon Drake started writing historicals, but and she went medieval. But after that, the other company decided that, oh, historicals are picking up. So I also started writing historicals under Heather Graham. And I absolutely love history, and I think it's incredibly important. And I like to tell ours, because I think one of the things when I was on a student and in Europe, we were in Germany, and one of the first places we went was Dachau. And I was horrified. Um, but they also, I couldn't understand, like, why would the German people keep this, this reminder? And they had the George Santa Anna saying above it, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So I think we all need to remember, no, we don't repeat bad things. We turn this all into the best we can. So I do think that our history is important. Like you said, I mean, beyond, I mean, uh, the abomination, of a human thinking they can own another human being, um, Puritans hanging Quakers, we can't do these things. So I do think it's incredibly important that we know about our past. But a lot of that came from one of them was really funny. We would pack 5 kids up in a Econoline extended van and go from Miami to Massachusetts every summer and sometimes for Christmas. Um, and so along the way, with 5 kids, you stopped a lot. And when they were young, we would try to do it where, yes, we would do things like we would go to King's Dominion, we would go to, whatever amusement park was along the way, but we would also stop at a lot of historic locations. And so we went to 18 million reenactments, we went to all kinds of churches, we went to museums along the way. And so learned a great deal. One of the most fascinating, I think, was going to the medical tents when you went to a reenactment and finding out, how they were treating the soldiers, and how many more died of disease and infection, than actually, being shot or bayoneted or caught by a cannonball. But I mean, the things that you learned were fascinating. And so hopefully a lot of that is in my American history. One thing I think was fun is they had made a discovery at Gettysburg. We were up there. And speaking of ghosts, if you stand on the field at Gettysburg when there's a mist coming in, you can really feel it. I wonder if you feel history, or I don't know what it is, but there's definitely something there. But I don't remember what it was now. They had found something. They had recently found something. And when we were back, my second son had told the teacher at school that she was wrong. They corrected whatever it was. And of course, we got called into the office, and you're kind of caught between a, you know, rock and a hard place, because, well, he is right. I don't know if he should have corrected you in class, but so I think it was to this day they all still love history, and they love to research wherever they go.
It's fascinating with a family like the Camerons because in this book series, you're bringing them to life at another time with different customs and cultures and traditions, ways of doing everything, and without the benefit of technology. How did that inspire you as you wrote?
I think it is. I mean, I think that's natural human curiosity too. It's fun to imagine how people lived at different times, or even with everything going on now. Down here in Florida, and certainly Louisiana this year, it's been like, oh my God, okay, now we're all here for COVID, and oh, what if we have COVID and a hurricane? Because then there's, it's one thing to be able to stay home and kind of keep to yourself when you have outlets, Zoom meetings and your phone and TV and everything like that, and quite different when all of a sudden you have no electricity. It changes everything. Um, but I do think it's fascinating to begin with, to read about when did we first start using automobiles? No, yes, they had them, but were they common on the road yet? And do you remember when did you get your first cell phone? I mean, these things become so much a part of our lives that it's interesting to go back and find out, what happened when, what everybody had. And then I think for me, when they do those things about who would you like to have at dinner? Oh my God, I would love to know Lincoln. And then that being just because I think he was an incredibly strong person, to do what he did when he did. Not a perfect man, not perfect at all, but a strong human being who dealt with so much, because of course his wife believed in ghosts. Um, and just so many interesting factors about him. And then another one is, and I did use him, dying to meet Edgar Allan Poe. He just, again, such an interesting, haunted, torn character. Um, it just, when you think about the people that fascinate you, and then just look at the lives around them, and I think that's how. Are we always perfect? I don't know. You always try your best, to make sure that you have it all right. Cameron came from the fact that my dad, Scottish, and spent a lot. I said he was older when I was born. My grandparents died when I was fairly young, but I do remember the mining camp logging camp up in northern Wisconsin, and his family, and all anybody around. It was really funny. This little tiny city, it was settled by about 300 Scots and 300 Germans, and it's still 300 Scots, 300 Germans. Some of them have, mixed up. In fact, I grew up thinking that Wiener Schnitzel was Scottish, but when I was little. But a lot of his friends were Camerons, and I love the name.
You deserve to be recognized as one of the true pioneers of paranormal romantic suspense. You and Charlene Harris and Anne Rice and just a few others that invented this new hybrid genre. For you, when did that intersection first happen when Harrison Investigation series and then the Crew Hunters franchise came along conceptually for you?
Actually started with a vampire novel. And at the time, Charlene had not written what turned into the True Blood series. And in order to sell the vampire novel, I also had to sign a contract for historical novels. Paranormal just was not accepted at the time. But I had an idea. I really wanted to use New Orleans, and I really wanted to use a female hybrid vampire who was good and managed to stay around for years and years and years by going to Europe every time she got old and then coming back as one of her own descendants. Um, but then, of course, soon after, vampires did begin to take off, thanks to Charlene. I mean, Anne Rice definitely put the modern vampire, on the map. And then I think Charlene took it as far as one can, and then allowed other people to be able to make use of this legend. So that was the first thing I had done, the Harrison Investigation series, and then the Cruise series. I had that, well, I mean, a lot of it just, again, things relate to life. I had a friend when I was in high school, a dear friend I loved dearly. And a kind of a bizarre thing happened. A couple of the high schools down here were always rumbling, and I don't think that the young man who threw the Royal Castle beer mug, they were heavy glass things, meant to kill anyone, but he did. It struck friend right in the head, and he wound up dying. But he had always been just fun and just, I'm going to go see my grandfather in the cemetery. Yes, of course he talks to me, and things like that. And he kind of gave me the idea for Adam gets into doing what he does because he loses his son Josh. And he always knew that Josh was special, with these powers of his. And anyway, they pass on to Josh's best friend when he passes away. And so that is the first one. He sets her up with the haunted house. And then I realized, oh, Adam doesn't have these powers himself, but he recognizes them in other people and knows how to put the right people on a situation. And then, of course, one of the first ones I did with that had to do with, I have very good friends who of theater people too, but one of them is, let's see, the singing, uh, singing bread man at the Venetian, and all kinds of things like that. But they came from the same bag. They actually have a little publishing company now too. But um, I visit them a lot, and we were in the casino one time playing craps, and it was kind of like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if there was a ghost running around who could change those dice for you? So that's where that one came from.
So it sounds like, along with a lot of the authors we talked to on the show, a lot of these ideas come to you out of real life scenarios.
Most of the time. Or again, too, with the five children, now they have brought one of my favorite that I use now. Of course, I'm not going to remember any titles, but my son is friends with a young lady who became a fabricator. And that means she works on the Geico pig, on vampires, on everything else. And she gave us a tour one time that I thought was fabulous because I saw when you walked through the studio, it's the old Stan Winston Studios, I believe called Legacy now, but you will have something like the cute little Geico pig standing right next to the creepiest looking zombie you've ever seen. So that was great. I figured I had to have a character who was a fabricator. And then her other job is one of her jobs is dressing Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. So it's kind of like, all right, well, she said someone has to do it. So of course, I'm sure you could get worse jobs. She also says he's a very nice young man, by the way, or man now. He's not very young anymore.
They all are. When we run through this just prolific list of titles from the Harrison Investigation series, there's Haunted, The Presence, Ghost Walk, The Seance, The Dead Room, Nightwalker, and many more. Any favorites you most enjoyed writing?
I don't know, not really, but I was going to say I remember one time, can't remember whether it was one of my editors told me, when someone asks you what your favorite book is, it is always the next one out on the market. I'm so grateful. And I think I think it's fun too. We've just had a lot of amazing experiences because of it. I was in, I belong to everything out there and I love all my groups. I belong to horror writers, thriller writers, mystery writers, romance writers, and I just have fantastic people in every one. But horror writers, a lot of us went to something called Camp Nikon in Rhode Island. And then the Sunday night afterwards, a group of us would always take the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, Massachusetts. So one time when we were there, I was supposed to be meeting with some people from Mira and doing a little video thing there. And apparently on the same date, they had set up with the Biography Channel to film one of their haunting shows. And so the producers confused each other, and the Biography Channel lady asked me if I would like to be Lizzie Borden. And I thought, she hasn't read a lot. I said, well, Lizzie was 32, so I'm not so sure. But China had just gotten out of Cal Arts, and she was there. So I was going to be Abby Borden, and she was going to be Lizzie Borden. Another friend of ours, Dennis Cummings, was the father. And it turned out to be a tremendous amount of fun. She was far more nervous than I was. I was tired. I had just been at a convention. So we were in the same place where Abby Borden had been murdered, and she had a hatchet. And first funny thing was when the director's very happy, everything's gone well, and the cameraman said, no, 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 we have to do it over again. And the director said, why? And it turned out they had gotten the hatchet from Leanne, who owned the place, and it had a giant welcome written on it. So they had to start over on that. But afterwards, they got it filmed and everything. And then they asked me if I'd like to throw blood on China. And I said, you bet. So I threw blood all over her. And then they were waiting to film something else. And she was just wandering back and forth, and she went to the window. And then all of a sudden out in the street, you hear, ah! And I'm like, what happened? I went running to the window. And apparently there'd been a group of 6 or 7 people there standing there. And they will swear to you till the end of time that they saw the ghost of Lizzie Borden because China was standing there in the morning. But that has given me, getting to do that, the house, Leanne had it immaculate. It looked just like it did back in the day. It wasn't the same furniture, but she acquired the same period furniture. And I would go through at night, and it wasn't so much, Lizzie Borden hated the house. She wasn't hanging around. I was sure of that, if there was such a thing. But the house was also full of headless mannequins wearing period clothing. So the mannequins totally freaked me out and gave me a lot of material to go with in many different things.
Your now legendary Crew of Hunters series is one of the longest running and best selling in the millennium ever since it kicked off in 2011 with 4 books in one year: Phantom Evil, Heart of Evil, Sacred Evil, and The Evil Inside. Please pull the curtain back on the original inspiration behind this bookstore phenomena.
It's kind of a combination of two things. One of the great things about thriller writers is once a year, every year for years, we would go to the New York City FBI offices. And I was totally blown away by the fact that assistant directors, department heads would come and talk to us. I would think, oh my God, are we worth your time? But they considered it important to talk to people because if they are on something and they need your help, they want you to think, oh, the FBI, let me help. Not, oh my God, it's the FBI. You know what I mean? So they're a lot of their um, feelings had to do with that. And I was bowled away by the information about the FBI we were able to get. So I definitely wanted to use the FBI. And one of the times when we were there, I was talking to a young woman who was saying, oh, no, lots of FBI agents are together. They're just not usually in the same unit. So I had to make sure that my unit was separate and special so that these people could wind up together. And since the rest of the world thinks you're crazy, it's probably best to wind up with someone else who, has learned that they see the dead. As far as that goes, if I do believe, yeah, my mind is open. I have not yet seen proof. Have not seen a ghost on, Letterman or anything like that yet. So, or on the news. But my mind is open, and I do think, having grown up in a very interesting Anglo-Catholic family, they're very much so. Your Nicene Creed, I believe in the Holy Ghost. So we're saying to begin with that we do. Also, just I've had so many fun people in my life. My father-in-law was adorable. He was extremely Italian and very religious and believed in something that he called matzah which of course sounded like soup to me, but it turns out that they're Italian leprechauns, and he had seen a lot of them in the graveyard. So he, just like I said, the people who I grew up with and a lot of the people who came into my life are very much into the concept. I also have friends called the Peace River Ghost Trackers, and they've set us up on some of the ghost experiences that they've done. One, we did the Spanish Military Hospital in St. Augustine, and the Queen Mary, and various other places. But they're great, and they're very funny because they don't go in with the concept of, oh, we're going to go find a ghost or talk to the ghost. They go in with the concept of, let's find out what the explanation most probably is, because most of the time it's wiring, it's pipes, it's things like that. And I was with them at the Spanish Military Hospital, and they had their cameras out, their bank of screens all set up, the microphones and everything. And I was sitting behind the cameras when I saw a large black thing coming over the cameras. And I'm like, oh my God. And I called to one of the guys. I said, Craig, am I seeing something? And he came over to stand behind me, and he said, yeah, you're seeing Scott's shadow. He's walking across the room right there. So I cannot say that I've seen a ghost, but I'm not denying that they could exist. And I also think that they can exist within this sounds strange, within the bounds of reality.
With characters like Special Agent John Dixon and his team of hunters like Agent Jackson Crow and Angela Hawkins and Jack Mallory and Whitney Tremont and Jenny Duffy, give us a sense of how you create these characters on the page.
I was going to say, if you're going to use them again, make sure you keep a Bible. I had a very good friend who's very successful, but she was so funny one time because she did a series and did not realize that her character had blue eyes in the first book and green eyes in the second book. So in the third, they were lovely blue-green. It's definitely good to keep a Bible, because even if you're envisioning people, Jackson Crow, I can see almost any time, because when I was growing up in South Florida, and to this day, I love our local Native American culture. I think they're fascinating. I think the survival is fascinating. Um, and they're just all those. When I was a kid, there was a band that played all the time, when the Miccosukee group. Um, but I just loved everything about them, and I respect it so much too. So I was at Jackson Crow came from somebody I actually met. I was at a Native music fest, and we had Native Americans from all over the country at it. And I was talking to a gentleman there who was actually a bassist, but Jackson Crow looks exactly like him and sounds like him. He was very just intelligent, well educated. He was also a wonderful bass player, but uh, it just sometimes you use people that you see, and sometimes you kind of put together people that you know, and then sometimes you draw people right out of the air. So it depends. But I think the most important thing with the series is not even just the way they look, but remembering their character traits. So and so tends to speak roughly and then be sorry. So and so never says anything that isn't kind. Or, I mean, just the way that people behave, I think, is also as important as the blue eyes, the green eyes, the brown eyes, gray eyes.
Did Crew of Hunters come to you right away as the obvious banner name for the series? And what's the root of the rather unique spelling of crew?
Part of the crew, KREWE, is because for some reason I'm a lifelong Floridian. I love my state, love sun, love water. But when I was a little kid, I went to New Orleans with my dad on a business trip, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I've been in love with the city of New Orleans ever since. And so the first case takes place in New Orleans. And probably at any given moment, I can describe Royal Street or Bourbon Street or, these places that I've been so many times. Although, of course, when I was 5, no, my dad did not take me walking down Bourbon Street or going to a strip club or any such thing. I fell in love with the architecture, the cemeteries. They were so atmospheric, and the zoo and all that kind of thing. So, and that's something too. I put on a benefit conference in the city for many, many years to bring. Now, of course, it's completely back, but took a long time. And the concept was, if you can get anybody in, those people will tell people, will tell people, will tell people. And like I said, I just love the city. I revisit many, many times in books. So that has a lot, to do with it. And like I said, again, the very first book took place in New Orleans. And so, of course, you have your Mardi Gras cruise. And so they became the Crew of Hunters.
You're such an artist at writing dialogue, whether for the Crew of Hunters series, or the Flynn brothers, or Cafferty and Quinn, or the Graham family, or all sorts of other standalones like Hurricane Bay, Picture Me Dead. I could go on and on. It's always equally entertaining across every canvas you paint on with words. Please share a bit about that process in action for viewers.
I think a lot, I envision people and how they would say it. Obviously, a lot of dialogue is taken from, life, things that go on around you. Um, and then it's and just, different people have different speech patterns, and try to think about them. And then again, yeah, definitely, I do think theater a lot. If we were on if we were on stage and saying this, how would we be saying it, or that type of thing. So yeah, but I think most important, doesn't matter, how you write it down, or um, exactly what it comes from. But I think thinking of how you've heard it, thinking of people, thinking of your character is very important. There's especially too, because there are certain things, if someone older says, everyone's going to go, huh? Or, which is not bad as long as they're ready to explain it, but we all have our ways of talking, and there's, I think, of friends who would never say certain things, and then friends who would say them quite easily, and it depends on the character.
Any favorite crew hunters or other characters from your broader series you've enjoyed recurring most over the years?
I think the last year, some of my favorite characters are, there are 3 brothers who become crew agents, and their parents were actors and they died when a chandelier fell on them. But their mother was a diva and she comes back all the time. So she's definitely one of my favorite. I like her a lot. And then again, I used Edgar Allan Poe and continuing characters. Now, I haven't worked with Cafferty and Quinn for a while, but I really liked them. And um, Jackson Crowe, Angela Hawkins.
What was mysterious enough about Key West to inspire the original idea for the Bone Island series, which features Ghost Memories, Ghost Shadow, Ghost Night, and Ghost Moon?
I also love Key West. Key West has got the greatest, I shouldn't say greatest, but I mean, just most bizarre legend ever. Try to, anybody watching can look this up, Elena de Hoyos. Um, she was a gorgeous young Cuban girl who somebody who called himself Count von Cassel fell in love with. He was older and creepy, and she was young and beautiful. But she wound up with tuberculosis, and he tried to convince the family he could cure her. She was married, but as soon as tuberculosis was announced at the time, it was a death warrant. Her husband took off. He was married, but his wife was living in Zephyr Hills, Florida. But anyway, she died, and he built a beautiful monument for her in the Key West Cemetery. And he would go every day for 2 years, bring flowers and music, and then all of a sudden, he didn't come anymore. And then 7 years later, when he was living in an airplane on the beach, somebody looked in the window and saw he hadn't gone to the gravesite anymore because he had dug up Elena de Hoyos. And he claimed he married her. And she was in a gown on his bed where she stayed. And a couple of really creepy things about that. When she originally died, 500 people came through the Dean Lopez Funeral Home to see her. They decided to have another wake for her after they found her, and 5,000 people came through. Yeah, it's pretty creepy. But also, I think what's funny is he spent all those years buying wax and piano wire and things like that to repair her, because one thing they didn't say in the newspaper back then was he made her his wife in every way. They didn't put that out publicly. But and then he was arrested, but it was past the statute of limitations on grave robbery, and the psychologist deemed him sane. The monument in the Key West Cemetery exploded, and he took off and went to Zephyr Hills, and it's just and made his living the rest of his life by selling his memoir, Undying Love, and actually, there's God, I'm forgetting the author's name right now. I hate to do that, but there is a book out on it. It's just really bizarre and creepy. But Key West is kind of one of those places where it's like, oh, and nobody notices. Key West is just everybody's welcome. Everybody does their own thing. It's just, it also has great history though, too. The age of salvage and all this kind of thing. So yes, it's a party town like New Orleans, but it also, like New Orleans, has amazing history. So working, I go to, I go to Key West at the drop of a hat. I just love it. It's a wonderful place. So that was definitely, I have to say, Elena de Hoyos was the inspiration for that entire.
You took your legions of fans around the world in the realm of the undead with the Vampire series, which includes highlights like Realm of Shadows, Dead by Dusk, and Kiss of Darkness, and the Vampire Hunter series, which has Night of the Wolves and Night of the Vampires, so many more. What intrigued you about this particular underworld to make you want to explore it?
Well, sometimes we do things that are strange. In fact, I wound up recently putting something up on Amazon myself, because the Heather Graham, the crew, and the FBI, and that is so accepted from the name right now. I wound up bringing Shannon Drake back to life and putting up a Arthurian fantasy based on history, Daughter of Darkness and Life under Shannon Drake. I put it up on Amazon myself because they kind of were like, well, I don't know if we should be doing something like that right now. But I mean, honestly, something that's been very difficult right now with anything, I've done a lot of short stories for anthologies, and a lot of them because authors are trying to do their little bit to try to get money and food to people who need it, and children, different places working for children to keep everybody, eating. Um, so we'd gone through, oh, I don't know, are we putting COVID in it? No, I don't want COVID in my fantasy. Or no, we have to be realistic and COVID goes in. And I kind of thought, you know what? I've always been fascinated by the Roman withdrawal from Britain. And I was just reading on King Arthur, and I just thought, you know what? Okay, I'm going to do this and put it up, and whatever happens, happens. Um, so that's not necessarily what you should be thinking when you're trying to, if you want to sell to a traditional publisher. You do need to be looking at what they're publishing, and what you love that fits in with what they're publishing. But you don't always know. I know my vampires were ahead of time. And in fact, The Last Cavalier, I wrote 2 years before they decided they were going to open a line in which it would fit. And then, of course, the editor called me. So no, you don't always know. I mean, obviously, you look at what else. But I mean, I think the thing is too, with a lot of us, again, yeah, you've got to be careful that you know what you're writing about. But two, just you've got to write what you love. There's not a lot in my books that's technical. I'm not a terribly talented technical person. So um, it just, whereas, you read Scott Turow and it's fascinating, because he does. But again, I just really think that you have to think what, again, it's what do I want? What am I trying to do now? Am I doing this to entertain myself? Am I doing this because I have to? Am I doing this because I have looked at this publisher's catalog of books and I love this kind of book and that's what I want to write?
Great advice. Any other sage words you'd share here to make sure aspiring authors watching are headed down the right path, just new to the business?
One of my first tip to people is, somebody I know, I hear sometimes like, oh my God, I don't read anymore. I'm so busy writing. I think it's a mistake not to read. Reading is what reminds us why we wanted to write. So I do think it's very important that you read. The other thing is, whatever it is that you can do, if it's a page a day, if it's 10 pages a day, if it's every other day, if it's 3 days a week, don't forget to be consistent. Make sure you're always working. Um, that's the most important thing. Make sure when you start something. One of the, actually, Nora Roberts said one of the best things I've ever heard. She said, I can always fix a page. A blank page remains a blank page. So always, do your best to make sure that you're getting something down. And remember to love it. Remember to love what you're doing. It's funny, if anybody ever wants to go to my website, there's a game we play at a lot of conferences, and it's a writing game. And when we're in person, you cut them up and hand them out. But you take 3 nouns and you take 3 adverbs, and then you take a starting sentence. We usually use the blood drips slowly down the wall. And you actually can turn that into a high school romance. I've had that done. The blood was from the makeup kit that somebody knocked over while they were preparing for the senior play. It was also a zombie story. Zombies next door kept throwing their leftovers into the yard of a vegetarian zombie. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can take it, but if you're feeling stuck, just take words or characters and put them together and do yourself a little story, and it'll get you going again. I do think that the most important thing for you is to be like a sponge, absorb everything and then keep what works for you. Some people work best at 6 a.m. Some people work best at night. It's a totally different process for everyone.
Out of curiosity, when do you like to write?
Whenever I can. I'm living with a 2-year-old, I told her. Yeah, no, I've always been anytime the time is there, take it, because 5 children. And I do tend to like mornings because I did have 5 kids, and for years and years and years and years and years, somebody, had to be at a bus stop or be dropped off by 6, and so I would come home. It was funny. We had the first 4 in 6 years, and then the youngest is 7 years younger than her oldest sister. So for all that time after somebody was dropped off, the house was empty, and that was when you worked. So I still like that time. And she was in college at least 6 months before I stopped waking up at 5:30 a.m. and found out I actually enjoy sleeping later. So, um, but again, I will write any time that the time is available. Again, especially now, um, because we are confined with a 2-year-old, and boy, they like a lot of attention.
Most authors dream of cracking the New York Times bestseller list just once in their career. You've done it dozens of times over. How did that first time feel? And does it ever get old?
I was just so grateful. I was so grateful. Um, and to this day, sometimes I'm still amazed, and I'm more than anything, I'm just grateful to be able to do something that I love so much for a living. That's like the best gift in the world. So no, I'm extremely grateful.
Your books have always had such beautiful covers. Have you ever had to go to the publisher to fight for a cover you either hated or really liked that they didn't want to use?
Well, I am really lucky right now. I absolutely love our art. I have a young man named Sean who does most of my covers at HarperCollins, and I think he's brilliant. The only problem um, I honestly ever had, first cover I did, Walden's and Dell, actually the uh, founding of Ireland book by the Vikings. It came out green, and Walden didn't want to take it because they thought it looked too sci-fi. So it's like my very first historical, and they're fighting over it. They weren't going to take it. Um, and then the publisher, Dell, back then was, that's my cover and it will stand. Yeah, so it was kind of like, and nobody really cared what I thought at the time. You hate to say it, sometimes when you were young and starting out, it was kind of hard. But the only other thing I think I've ever had happen where I had to call and say something is when the book was in Miami and you could see the mountains in the background. So it's kind of,
Oops.
yeah, not going to work.
After 150 books in print in 25 countries around the world over the past 40 years and counting, what's given you the biggest thrill about seeing fans and book lines, say holding a translation of one of your books from a foreign country, they don't even speak English, but they still love your work? And it's happened so many times to you. And it also must fit with your natural love of travel, I'd imagine.
It's like the most exciting thing in the world when somebody tells you that, and you know that you got to make a difference for someone. That's like the best thing in the world. It's just wonderful and great. I enjoy touring. I love people. I love all the conferences I go to. And I love what you get from them. Again, every time you meet somebody, you have a new experience, you have a new character. And then again, I just like people and I like places.
Have your fans ever made it into any of your books, either as an inspiration for a character or say their name?
Things I remember about people, yeah. I mean, certainly, I think we all base all of our characters on people. And when, people we know or have met or have seen in one way or another. I mean, not completely. No, you're not taking a person, you're taking things about a person.
Whether it's paranormal romantic suspense, paranormal suspense, historical fiction, horror, romance, where you just won the Romance Writers of America's Lifetime Achievement Award, you've been recognized around the globe as a pioneer, opening doors for so many new generations of authors. That must make you proud, that legacy.
You said it. I would like to think that, I inspired others to do the same thing. That would be the most exciting. Because people ask you that, like, oh my God, why do you give speeches? Why do you want to encourage other people to be your competition? And I think with almost all of us, it's like, well, people don't write. What am I going to read? If you don't have a bunch of good books out there, what have I got? Um, but I do, again, I am so grateful for what I do and that I make a living at it. And I love so much. It just really is when somebody tells you, or a couple of things. I remember with one book when I was on autographing, a lady was hugging it and she came up and she said, "Thank you so much." She said, "My husband passed away and this got me through it." And I thought, wow, that was it. That made everything, so worthwhile. But again, I would just like to think that, yeah, we've paved the way for the future. Because again, like I said, I belong to everything. I like horror, I like paranormal, I like romance, I like everything. So you know,
What do you miss about the pure love of writing once you've been away from it on the road for a while and are coming back to sit down and work on a new book?
when you've not been at the computer and you have this idea, it's like, oh my God, I got to get that down as soon as I can. That kind of thing. Oh
And
my God, yeah, I know what I'm going to use that for. That kind of thing.
In closing, once you're done writing that new book and then back out on the road, it must make you really happy when you're in an airport and you see a fan reading one of your books.
I have, and I thank them.
Heather Graham, you're a true legend. It's been so wonderful to talk to you today. Thank you again for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
You have honored me, and I thank you. This has been lovely.